Hi everyone. If you don't know who I am, this is Father Pierre. I'm at the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress here in Anaheim, California at the Convention Center here. There's about 40,000 people here. This is the largest Catholic conference in North America. I think there's probably about 4,000 Canadians, so I'm not really sure, including 6 friars from the Canadian Holy Spirit province. This friar standing next to me is not Canadian. He is a friar, he's a Franciscan. And unlike all of us Canadians who are down here, he's actually a speaker here. But Father Dan, Horan, and I have known each other for a long time. We just figured about 20 years. So there's things about each other we don't share. But nonetheless,
sworn to secrecy. We were novice classmates, so.
Oh, and before I go any further, I have to confess to the folks at St. Joseph the Worker, I won't be there on Sunday because I'll be here. But I'll see you next weekend. Anyway, Dan.
Hey, Pierre.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to
How
see
you doing?
I'm good. It's like you mentioned, this is just an extraordinary event. I'm always excited to see all of our Canadian sisters and brothers come down, especially the friars. It's awesome. If you've never been before but have the opportunity or have the interest, I highly encourage it. You know, all the folks, Father Pierre and all the other folks who come down could answer questions and tell you about it. But you don't know what it's like. You can't fathom it until you experience it. Particularly the liturgies. If you go into the arena, it's one of these things where it's not just the liturgical music, and Father Pierre's an amazing singer, a great musician, and so, I mean, you're used to hearing good music, but to have not just a choir, but a choir made up of all the composers that write the songs that we sing and pray with all the time, it's mind-blowing, so it's really cool.
It really is. So you have been a speaker here, one of the main stage speakers, in fact, for several years. How many years have you been doing this?
Somebody asked me that earlier, and it's either 6 or 7. So it feels longer and it feels shorter at the same time. It kind of, as time goes by, it speeds up a bit. But I've been honored to be invited back 6 or 7 times.
What are you speaking about this time?
So I'm doing 2 workshops, one tomorrow and one Sunday afternoon, and the first one is on Pope Francis and his spirituality, particularly kind of unpacking his spirituality of holiness in the Apostolic Exhortation from 2 years back. And the title of that is Called, Loved, and Sent, and this idea that we're all called by virtue of our baptism to a life of Christian holiness and ministry. We're all loved and experience God's mercy along the way, and we're all kind of commissioned, as Pope Francis often says. Every one of us is meant to be a missionary disciple sent out into the world to be a sign of God's love. So that's kind of the nutshell of tomorrow. And then I'm giving another workshop that's kind of tied to my most recent book, which is on theological anthropology. In other words, how do we understand the human person in the Christian Catholic tradition, particularly in light of things like science and philosophy and social science and all the kind of aspects of human knowledge that we encounter, as time goes on. So that's called, the title of that, I'm very proud of it, and a couple other people, including Father James Martin, those Jesuits always stealing from Franciscans. I'm talking to you, Jim. So the title is Loving the Dust We Are. And he said, I think I'm going to name my workshop. so I'm very excited about both of those.
That exhortation, rejoice and be glad, really speaks about joy. Pope Francis he's got an exhortation, the joy of love, and then of course, his first big one was the joy of the gospel.
Yeah.
We've been working through that at St. Joseph the Worker in the parish, in fact. I don't know, I mean, we're Franciscans, so we do have a sense of that from our tradition. What is your sense of the place of joy in the Christian tradition?
I think it's so important. I can think of a couple things that are really key. So, you're right. As Franciscans, we're associated with Francis of Assisi, spirit of joy. We have our own kind of internal narratives and stories about so-called true and perfect joy, which isn't as happy and go lucky as it might seem at first. But this idea that joy, and Pope Francis makes this point over and over again, joy is different from optimism or happiness. Happiness, as good as it is kind of a fleeting emotion. You could be happy one minute, unhappy the next, sad the next. But joy is rooted in our hope that's founded on Christ. And so joy is a kind of contentment with the Spirit of God, experience of the Spirit of God in our lives. And so joy is something that we need to cultivate, sustain. It's tied to the hope that we have, that Christ gives us in the gospel. And so I think that's really, really important. If we reduce joy to kind of mere happiness or, I don't know, euphoria or something, we're selling ourselves in the gospel story.
Well, thank you.
My
It's been great
pleasure.
chatting, and we'll chat later
Yes.
over coffee or something.
Exactly.
And folks back home, see you soon.
All the best.